It's a good day today. The sun is shining. I have my truck in the shop, and today I'm going to be doing an EGR delete. This truck, when I got it, it already had all the emissions deleted, so they reflashed it, and the previous owner put a straight pipe in it, but they didn't remove the EGR assembly, like the valve and all that. So today I'm going to be removing all the EGR components and putting a delete kit in. I got a kit from DynoVox, so I'm going to see how that goes. The Cummins 6.7 liter is such a great engine. Put quality parts in it. Don't mess around with the cheaper stuff. The DynoVox kit is about mid-range for the price point, but it's a high quality kit. So here's all the components here. What I really like is it's got nice thick block off plates, so those will go on your exhaust. A lot of the cheaper kits, these are a fair bit thinner, and when you get on the boost, they start leaking. So with this kit, they're nice and thick. You got a quality aluminum fitting with a quality O-ring. Comes with a high quality coolant hose. Just look at the end of that. You know, that's not your run-of-the-mill cheapy hose. Comes with another heavy-duty plate and a set of quality gaskets. So those are the gaskets there for the intake. I believe those are the correct bolts. Silicone gasket for the intake horn. So nothing is cheap in the kit. I'm impressed with it. I think it's a quality kit. So the Cummins 6.7 diesel was in trucks from 2007. Maybe late 2007 all the way up to present. The EGR delete kits are all pretty much the same from 2007 all the way up to 2018, maybe later. I haven't seen any of the later trucks though. So the first step would be remove your engine oil dipstick, because the next step is removing that cover, and you need to pull the dipstick to remove that cover. With the cover out of the way, you can see all the EGR system components. Here you have your EGR servo assembly. Here you have your EGR cooler, EGR crossover tube. And here's your EGR valve assembly. There's also a flapper valve at the end of the intake horn, which creates vacuum at idle. So a lot of guys will drain the coolant. I think that's a little bit unnecessary because all the components are above the reservoir bottle, or at the same height as the reservoir bottle. So any coolant that comes out, it's not going to be a whole heck of a lot. You can always put a bucket under the truck to catch the small amount that'll drain out. So save yourself some time. Don't worry about draining the coolant. The next step will be to remove the intake tube. If you're lucky, the hose clamp is facing directly up, so you can just go in here with a flathead screwdriver or a hose clamp socket wrench. Once you get the intake tube off, you can kind of move it out of the way, and that'll give you access to the hose clamp at the back here. Attached to the intake tube, there is the vacuum line for the crankcase vent. It has a spring-loaded hose clamp that can be easily gotten to with a pair of pliers. So once you compress that clamp, just wiggle it up. It's not going to want to wiggle down, so you got to wiggle it up. You can use the same snap ring pliers to clamp the hose, give it a twist, being careful not to damage the hose. Yeah, I got it. See, the hose clamp, don't lose it unless you're doing crankcase vent delete. Okay, my crankcase vent hose is off. The bottom of the intake tube is off. I can just pull it out now. The next step is to remove the EGR crossover tube. There's two 8mm nuts on the V-band clamps, and then there's an 8mm nut or a bolt at the very front here you can get with a long socket and 3/8 ratchet or 1/4 inch ratchet. This nut here on this clamp hits the heat shielding, so spray these two nuts really well, two 10mm, and remove the heat shielding and you can remove the clamp. And it should come right off. I was wondering what it would look like in there because this truck has 7,000 idle hours. You know, and it looks not bad. There's the valve going into the intake, and there's a fair bit of carbon in there. But that's why you do an EGR delete kit, because you don't want that crud on the back of your valves. You don't want that crud on your intake. Next, I'm going to remove the EGR valve. It's just 4 10mm bolts. And there's a 12mm bolt in there. Someone definitely had this apart before. At least I think it's a 12mm, feels like a 12. No, 1/2 inch. Yeah. I hope that's a metric bolt. It just has a 1/2 inch head on it. So what happened probably with 7,000 idle hours is this valve probably got stuck. Oh yeah, good. It's a metric bolt. Somebody didn't like cross thread it and put a standard grade bolt in there. And you just give it a tap. Oh, it wasn't even tight. So they didn't replace the gaskets when they took it off, so it was pretty loose. So there's a very good chance I had a boost leak out of there. So what I'm going to do now is scrape that gasket material off. Like, see, that's why you want, holy man. So what I think I'm going to do is I'll try to wipe out as much of that with my finger as I can. Maybe I'll get the vacuum first, yeah. I'll put the vacuum on there and I'll just scrape it with my finger and suck that stuff out. Better that than that carbon falling into the intake. So I'm going to shove something in the hole there just to keep the bits right at the surface so I can vacuum it out. So you're going to have to scrape that gasket off. These are high temperature gaskets because it's exhaust gas that's coming into the intake. Even though it goes through the EGR cooler, it could still be really hot. So that's why there's high temperature gaskets. The kit also comes with high temp gaskets, but they're not really required anymore. You know, you could have a high quality, you know, paper, silicone type gasket on there. And they come off pretty easy. They're pretty pliable gaskets. That coating on there, I don't know the name of the coating, but it's a very soft coating, so you won't have to scrape it very hard to get the coating to come off. If you have to sand it to get the last little bit of material off, use some emery cloth. You'll be less likely to get some abrasive material down into the intake. And you don't need to sand it too much, just give it a quick buff and that old gasket material will come right off. If you over sand it, you'll round the edges and then you'll have less of a sealing surface. That's why a lot of guys sand stuff with blocks, because it keeps it all flat. You don't, like, my finger will make round edges on there. Okay, now we can put the block on there. First, get the gaskets in place. And then you can prep your block. So this block is powder coated, and sometimes it's really hard to get the surface perfect with powder coating. So, I mean, it'll seal just fine. This is just something I do. So I wanted to make sure the surface was true and flat, and I just held it flat on the table and just sanded it back and forth until I got a nice flat surface. So now I know it's perfectly flat on the bottom. I sanded off some of the powder coating, but no biggie. So I'm gonna apply a light layer of silicone, and then bolt it on. It doesn't have to be high temp silicone, and you probably don't even need silicone because these gaskets will mash down and adhere pretty well. So I got my gasket siliconed on the one side. Just wipe the surface with some mineral spirit, or you could use gasoline, or just something to get the oil off. And it's not even necessary, really. I'm just overdoing it a bit. Those gaskets will stick to almost anything. I'm just making sure. So some of the kits, they have an O-ring on there, but I don't know what the O-ring does. Same thing as what I'm doing with the silicone here. It's making sure that the gasket adheres to the plate. But this plate is pretty flat, so I'm not too worried. So guaranteed it's adhered to the plate, and when I install it on there, guaranteed it's going to adhere to the intake horn. So I'll snug all these up. So the torque spec for these bolts isn't a lot. It's 24 Newton meters or 212 inch pounds. So not a lot, so be careful. Have to convert it to foot pounds from Newton meters though. So it's 24 Newton meters, it's like 17 foot pounds. Next thing, I'm going to pull off this valve for the servo assembly. So these two cables pull, they open this valve and allow the exhaust gas into your intake. Yeah, so got to pull the heat shield off. There's 4 bolts. Is that a 10 millimeter? Bolts for the heat shield, and then this just sits on top of your EGR cooler. There's 2 bolts on the side here, 2 bolts over here. And then the whole thing can come off all as one. You don't have to take those cables off individually. You can pull your clips off now. Just flop them over to the side. This one on the bottom here might be a little bit tricky. I got the 10 millimeter wrench on there. Just interlock it with another wrench and push down on it. It's pretty tight. There we go. Next thing, I'll be removing the EGR servo manifold. It's just 2 15 millimeter bolts. I already loosened off the V-band clamp when I was removing the EGR servo. So just the 2 bolts and it should come right out. Stick a pry bar on there against the engine mount. If you have a 15 millimeter with a swivel end on it, that will work really well there. But I don't have a 15 millimeter with a swivel end, so I just put a 15 millimeter in the vise and gave it an extra little bit of a bend, and that works pretty good to get in there. And this is where the penetrating oil comes in handy, because it makes it easier to get that nut off. There we go. Once the nuts are loosened, it should just come right out. The DynoVox kit comes with new quality gaskets. I'm going to try 35 foot-pounds and see what that feels like. Yeah, 40 seems good to me. Although I forgot to take off the 1/8 millimeter here. There we go. Next step, I'm going to remove this vacuum line. It's just held on by 1 bolt on the side here. And then I'm going to remove this sensor. It's a 7 millimeter, and I'll just wiggle it off there. I'm going to pull the cover off. I'm going to pull the cover off for the crankcase vent.
It's 3:55 p.m.
And that is in lieu of cutting the plastic at the back here, because this coolant line goes into the EGR cooler, and it's held on by the bracket right here. So we undo that bolt, and this line comes straight up. Okay, I got the cover loose. I got all the bolts out. I pulled the hose clamp back. Okay, hose clamp is off. So now the cover can come straight up. And that's not that much work. It's pretty easy. You know, what is it? 8 bolts, and they come out pretty easy. Yeah, don't cut anything. That's just stupid. I wonder when the last time this crankcase vent was changed. It's probably been a while. Looks pretty dirty. 2 bolts at the back here, and these 4 holding the EGR cooler down. If I can get a light on it, maybe I can see those 2 at the back there enough to throw some spray on it. Oh yeah, they're not even rusted. Gotcha. Reach back there. There we go. So there's that one. I got the wrench hooked on it. Just double the wrenches up. Okay, those back ones are a little bit snug. Ah. Okay, and that other one in the back corner there, I got the ratchet on it with a 3-inch extension and a 15mm socket, and I have a 8-inch extension on it, 10-inch extension, and should go pretty easily. If you haven't done so already, loosen your reservoir bottle cap just to relieve some of that pressure. If you don't, and it's pressured up a lot, when you pull this bolt out here that holds the coolant line in, it could just pop off and spray coolant all over. The tube for your transmission dipstick, you have to lift it up over the stud. Okay, I got all the bolts out. Everything is loose. I'm going to pull that line up. A little bit of coolant will come out. So where you will have coolant coming out is when you go to slide the EGR cooler back, and some might be coming out of this line. As long as you keep the front of the EGR cooler facing up when you take it out, not a whole lot will come out. Because you see the level of the line here with the level of your fluid in the reservoir, this line is higher. So the only coolant that is going to come out is whatever's in the line here, and then whatever is trapped inside the EGR cooler. So don't tip it forward. To get the EGR cooler out, we'll have to lift the back up. So the back of the EGR cooler is just like this. It's sitting on the 2 studs. Get it off those studs, and then we can wiggle it back. There we go. And now if we're careful as we're taking it out, we won't spill too much coolant. Wants to catch on the transmission dipstick, but got it. There we go. And there we go, that is it. So minimal coolant drained out. You don't need to drain the cooling system. If you want to, drain it, but it's really unnecessary. Okay, and at the back there we can see where our other block-off plate goes. Here's the rear block-off cap. Make sure your plug is in there and nice and tight. I loosened this one already. They come tight, but it's a very good idea to check. I have some high heat Loctite here. It may or may not burn off. This is just something I'm doing. I want to make sure that plug does not fly out of there, rattle loose and fly out. Okay, there we go. I got my plug tightened up. I don't think anyone is silly enough to install this with the Allen head down, so don't install it with the Allen head down. You should be able to remove that plug once you put the plate in place. And the same torque spec on the front here. Torque the back one's the same spec. I torqued mine to 40 foot-pounds. I couldn't find the exact torque spec for it from Cummins or Dodge. If you do some looking around, maybe you can find it, but I'm doing mine to 40 foot-pounds. That seems reasonable and tight to me. The 2 bolts here are a 1/2 inch. When you're working on this side here, be real careful with your sensor. If you break that tube or damage the sensor, that's when you get all the loping, like when your Cummins sounds like it has a really big cam in it at idle. That's what causes that. It's when this thing plugs up or when it's got a break in it. It's when the computer's not reading the exhaust pressure. Okay, I got the carrier out. And look at that. There's like, what is that, ½ inch of threads that go into the side of the block. And then the rest, it just sits on the manifold. I don't know. If that's not a failure point, I don't know what is. There's a lot of things you can do at this stage. I'm gonna replace the fitting. The kit comes with a high quality brass fitting. The fitting takes a 1-inch wrench or socket. That's like 25, 26 millimeter if you have metric. Oh, okay, so you're gonna wanna do this quick because there is some coolant in that fitting, and that fitting is lower than the reservoir bottle by a couple inches. So the coolant level is probably about right here. So when you remove that, have your fitting really close by and unscrew that and toss it and then put your new one in real quick. Anyway, we'll see how that goes. I'm holding the camera in one hand and fitting in the other. And don't forget to put some sealer on that. I got some Teflon tape. And I think it's also higher than the fitting. Yeah. So I'm gonna quickly grab the hose and I put the hose on there as well. Right now my finger is plugging it. Let's see. Yep. You have to use your judgment on this. Don't over tighten it. You don't want the fitting to break off in the block. And we got our plug here, or our connector. Just fit in the tube where the EGR cooler once was. And it fits in there nice and tight. I'm not worried about that. And then we have our retaining collar here. Just goes over top just like that. And then you tighten up the set screws. So this is the way I do it. You could just tighten it up and call it good, or you can do this extra step. It's up to you. So have the collar where I want it. It's pushed in nice and tight. I tightened up the top set screw just to hold it in place. Orientate it how I want it and figure is a good spot. So I'm tightening them all up so it makes a mark on the hose. And what I'm left with is a mark where each one of those screws dug in. I'm going to take my drill and I'm going to make a tiny little divot where all those set screws are going to go into. Okay, so there's my slight divots in the steel for the set screws to bite into. On this side is a little bit more difficult. I used the file to get the top one, and the bottom one I probably can't get it. I'm going to go ahead and install the collar. I put some Loctite on the set screws. You don't want to use high strength Loctite because chances are if this collar does loosen off, it'll be the set screws wearing into the housing, you know, just vibrating into the housing. So you might have to give them a quick tighten later on, but probably not. It probably move with the housing. If they're all snugged up at the start, then it should be good to go. There's the fitting with the collar installed. I'm pretty confident that that's not going to go anywhere, but just to be sure. Now I'm certain. That's 4 strands of stainless steel wire. I'll give a quick demo how to tie that. So need some wire. Fold it in half, 2 strands. Fold it again to get 4 strands. You know, grab it about the midpoint. Give it a twist, bend the arms out. Twist up the one side. Just like that. Go over your connector, give it a twist, twist up the other side. And then come underneath the coupler. I suppose you can go over the top too if you want to go over the top. I like going over the bottom here. Take your pliers, give it a pull as you're twisting it. If you hear a snap, that means one of your strands of wires broke and you got to do it all over again. Third nut in on the manifold. Spray some penetrating oil. I'll remove that nut and I'll install the stainless steel nut that came with the kit. This long nut takes a 5/8 socket or a 5/8 wrench. I'm going to torque mine to 22 foot-pounds. We have our bracket here. So the top hole in your bracket, that's for your transmission dipstick. I think it's this one. This one or this one is for your exhaust pressure sensor. And the other one is for the coolant manifold here. The mounting bolt to the plate takes a 1/2 inch socket or wrench. I'm going to torque mine to 20 foot-pounds. Okay, so I played with the orientation on this mounting bracket for a while, and this is what I came up with. So we got the exhaust pressure sensor on the bottom. I had to take off the fitting. If you spray it with some penetrating oil and let it sit for a little bit, it should come off fairly easy. I had to give the pipe a slight bend, which you can do, just be careful. I have the coolant manifold mounted on the back side of the bracket. Originally I had it mounted on the front side, and I had the sensor like pointing straight up on the other side, and that didn't work because it was rubbing on the hose. And this is what I came up with that seemed to work best. So in this configuration, I figure that's best. I did upgrade the bolts for the coolant line and for the exhaust pressure sensor, just because they're a little bit heavier items. The mounting bolts that came with the kit will work. Just for peace of mind, I put a bigger bolt in there. I used the original bolt for the crankcase vent. And yeah. And yeah, the transmission dipstick mounts at the back. And that is that. I tried to mount it and get it in the right position so nothing was putting pressure one way or the other. Nothing was like, so when everything is vibrating while the engine is running, nothing is gonna like fatigue and break off or anything like that, because this bracket is only mounted by this one big bolt here. So if anything breaks off, it'll break off right at this nut here. So you don't want any kind of tension one way or the other. You want to be able to just bolt everything together without it pushing on the bracket or pulling the bracket. I put behind the coolant line here, I put one washer just for that reason. It wanted to twist when I tightened it up, so I put the washer in there, and there's less twist, there's less tension on the bracket. I cut the coolant line a couple times and resized it and refit it. And now I got it in the right orientation. So the coolant line that comes with the kit, it's long both ways. So it's long this way and long that way. You have to cut it to fit the orientation you want. So yeah, it worked out pretty good. So I'm going to put the intake tube back on, and then I'm going to pull that flapper valve off, and we'll put the horn on that came with the kit. Oh, and the exhaust pressure sensor, it has this heat shielding on it. I removed it just so it's not in the way while I was playing with it. It was kind of like in the way there. I guess that can stay on. But now that it's not next to the EGR cooler, it's in a less hot position, even though it's, I guess, close to the exhaust manifold, but it's still not in a vertical position right next to the EGR cooler. Okay, intake tube is in. Make sure you reinstall your crankcase vent sensor. Make sure you install the clip on your exhaust pressure sensor. Make sure it's not binding on the intake tube too much. Mine is just resting on it. Don't forget to install your wiring on your MAF sensor, I guess. Not sure the proper name for those, but don't forget to install those too. Okay, so two bolts to remove the shielding, and then should be a couple clips. I think it's already unclipped, yeah. And then 4 bolts holding the horn on, and then the hose clamp to the intake boot. Got the valve off. If you're feeling around underneath and you're wondering where that last bolt is, it's in the bottom there. It's countersunk into the housing. So if you're feeling there, you'll just feel the little round bump of the head. You won't feel the bolt itself. If you look under the truck, you'll see it. It's sitting there like that in the back corner. And there's some kit provided bolts. They're Allen head bolts and they're grade 8.8. If you want stronger bolts in there, put stronger bolts in there, but these ones should work fine. I was looking in the pile of bolts I took off, and there's 4 bolts the exact same size. I believe they're from the cover on the top here. They're grade 9.8, and they have a pan head on them, or like a built-in type washer type head. And they got a bolt head on it, so you don't have to mess around with the Allen keys to change your intake horn if you ever have to take it out or tighten it up or something. If you look at the orientation of the holes on the horn, they're not square. So you got the 2 holes closer. So you got the 2 holes closer together. That goes in like that, close to the engine. A little tip to get the intake tube back on if you're having trouble. Pull the hose clamp up off it, put it on the intake horn, and then just work your way around with your fingers, the intake hose there. And you should be able to get it on pretty easily, and then just slide the clamp back down. Intake hose is on, new boot is on. Intake hose is on, new intake horn is on. Now's a good time to grab some zip ties and start zip tying all the wires up that have nowhere to connect to anymore. And top up your coolant if it's low. Give the truck a start, see if there's any leaks anywhere. Take it for a test drive, see if you hear any kind of whistling or any kind of farting. Those are sure signs that you got an exhaust leak or you got a boost leak. And then if you have no leaks and no noises, the truck will probably run better. Like I started mine already before I put that intake horn on, and it sounds way better. And I really think I had an exhaust leak from one of these ports here, and I think I also had a intake leak from the EGR valve, because the previous owner took off the EGR valve because it probably stuck, and then he put it back on, and he didn't change out the gaskets. So the gaskets were like pulled apart and then just squished back together kind of thing. So there was probably definitely a leak there. And that's pretty much it. With a little bit of care, you can do a nice clean job like this. And overall, it's a pretty good kit. So I'd like to thank DynoVox for making the kit available to me, and I'd like to thank you for watching.